So that's part one of the discussion of um, AI ethics evaluations. Let's just very quickly run through this evaluation we did. This is from several years ago, and it's an evaluation in emotion or biometric AI. That is AI that runs on human output that is taken from human bodies and what's happening. And concretely, this evaluation occurred, or rather, centered on technology at the Emergency Medical Dispatch Center in Copenhagen. Uh, Here's the situation. When emergency calls are called into this emergency center, or any emergency center around the world, this is true anywhere, um, some of those calls address cardiac arrest, that is, the heart is stopped. Now, when a person's heart has stopped, this is just about the highest urgency possible in medicine. And in that kind of situation, the dispatcher who receives the call will, of course, immediately send out professionals, an ambulance, and paramedics to assist the person. But you can't wait because the need is so urgent, because the person will die very soon. The operator needs to instruct the others who are there, any other person who happens to be there, in the technique to get the heart beating again, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. That's basically what you see in Hollywood, where they bang on the chest. Um, yeah. So the situation is dire, and seconds matter, and that means that the faster that an emergency operator can determine that the patient is actually having cardiac arrest as opposed to some other problem, the faster they can, of course, dispatch the ambulance, but more importantly, change the whole subject of the call and stop getting information and start telling the person what to do. Now, we don't have time to care about more information. You need to do this now. So speed is of the essence. That's the key consideration. Enter artificial intelligence. These calls come into emergency centers. Of course, people are panicked. There's background noise. No one knows what's going. Frequently, no one knows what's going on. It sometimes happens that someone has cardiac arrest and the call is placed by a passerby. Right, someone is walking down the street. They have their heart stops, and they fall into the street. And just someone who happens to be there makes a telephone call. Other people gather around and talk. It's very, very difficult in that kind of situation for a dispatcher to ascertain exactly what is going on. Um, it's very hard for a dispatcher to be certain that a cardiac arrest has occurred. Perhaps the thought was artificial intelligence could more rapidly determine when a cardiac arrest had occurred. And in fact, it does. Here are the results. The red dots are cases in emergency situations where the AI outperformed the human. The blue dots are places where the human outperformed the AI. How did this work concretely? In the call center, the human would receive the call and act the way the human would. Um, but the AI would also be listening to the call, monitoring it. And if the AI sensed through its training and data that this was in fact a cardiac arrest call, a light would illuminate on the dispatcher's desk. And so they would know that the AI had determined this was cardiac arrest. Now, of course, the dispatcher would make their own decision. There might be cases where it clearly was not cardiac arrest. But in cases of confusion, um, if the light went on, the dispatcher might find it prudent to take that advice and begin administering directions for cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Um, Now, why would the machine work better? Well, I mean, part of the reason is just because there's lots of noise around cardiac arrest. And when people have their heart stops, they actually sometimes begin to gurgle or make noises which make no sense to humans. But if the machine hears that noise in the background, the machine knows that gurgling sound, that's cardiac arrest. So it may be that the human hears a kind of a gurgling sound in the background, but it means nothing. And the machine immediately translates that into a diagnosis. So that's just one example of how the machine might be able to beat the human. Well, more examples could be given, but that would be for a technical class. What matters here in the ethics seminar is just that it is reasonable to think that this data that we see here in front of us that is true data. There are cases where the machine will outperform the human. Now, we can do an ethics evaluation, and we did. And many of the kinds of discussion we had led to outcomes that are immediately clear. For example, social well-being. Is a society better served when more people live? Yeah, yeah, that's a great ethical benefit of this tool. This tool is excellent. It saves lives. You can't get much better than that. So the ethics of this tool is very, very high to begin with. Or another question, autonomy. Does this tool increase human freedom? Well, I mean, if the choice is being alive or being dead, yeah, yeah, it does. So autonomy too is very, very positive. Now, of course, there's also another autonomy question, which is about the dispatcher. Does the dispatcher feel as though he or she is controlling the AI, or does the AI control the dispatcher? So this one, the autonomy case, might not be quite so clear cut. We might conclude, yes, autonomy is increased. Someone lives, but it's not unmixed. There is some slight decrease with respect to the autonomy of the operator. And so the evaluation would continue on in that way. Now, I want to just talk about one specific debate we had. This was a debate about fairness. In Copenhagen, there are people of many different nationalities and languages, of course. What we discovered with the tool was that it worked much better for people who were speaking the native language and English than it did for other languages. Not at all surprising. In general, AI tends to work better for English because that's where most of the training data comes from. That's just a technical fact. And since this AI was produced in Copenhagen for use on that population, the local language was also used to create a lot of the training data. So, not surprisingly, the local language in English, the machine worked much better. But for some foreign language, let's say an Indian language or a Chinese, one of the Chinese languages, the machine did not work so well. The question we had was, is that fair? Should the machine work equally well for all languages? If not, how do we draw the line? How well should it work for these other languages? Someone could make the case that the machine, to be fair, should work well, equally well for every language. Doesn't matter whether you're an American or you're a Danish person in Denmark or a Japanese person or what have you. The machine will work equally well for your language. That makes sense. It's a reasonable argument. You can also make the case. You can say, look, 98% of our victims are speaking either English or Danish. So in that case, the machine, in fact, should work best for those people. We should concentrate the most resources where we have the most need. In Aristotle's language, unequals are treated proportionally unequally. If there's an unequally high number of people who suffer cardiac arrest and are speaking Danish or English, then the machine should work best. It should work unequally well for people who are speaking Danish and English. You can make that case too. So we have these two different notions or views on what counts as fairness for this tool. Above that, we have the general idea that everybody wants the tool to be fair. But we don't know what fairness is exactly. And so we had quite a considerable debate as we worked through this tool about whether or not we should finally determine that the tool functioned in a way which was unfair because people who were American or spoke English or were locals and spoke Danish, they had a better chance of living than the person from Japan, who in every other way was just the same. All three of those people, the local, the American, and the Japanese person, could be walking down the street. They all have cardiac arrest. They all are sent, call is made to the emergency center, and the American and the local get better service because the tool works better for their languages. Well, some people said that's fair. right? Because that's where the greatest need is. Other people said, well, no, that's not fair because it needs to work equally for everyone. So we don't need to go further down this road. You can read and look at the paper, but more importantly, because of the seminar, you can think it through for yourself. Um, how should fairness be determined in this case? What are the possibilities? A good ethics evaluation will consider every reasonable possibility, every different way of thinking about what it means to have a fair tool. And we've said, by one definition, equals treated equally, everyone is equal. So the tool should work equally well for every language. Or you might say distinctly, unequals are treated unequally. So the tool should work better for those who are more likely to be the victims, those majority languages. Or you could answer too by looking at the whole thing from a different angle. Some people said, you know what, we could think about it in terms of languages, but those language differences also frequently correspond with income or wealth differences. Frequently, it's the wealthiest people who speak the local language or English, and it's the immigrants or those who are least wealthy or those in the most need who speak languages which are not as well recognized by the machine. So if this is a question of wealth, not languages, we thought, does this change the notion of how we think about fairness? Maybe we can say that in the terms of language, it's fair for the machine to work better on the majority languages than the minority languages, because that's just unequal treated unequally. But can we say that same thing when the same exact effects mean it's working better for the wealthy than for the poor? Can it be fair when there's differences in language, but unfair when there's differences in wealth? It's not certain. But a good ethics evaluation will draw out those questions and make them clear so that decisions can be made.